Welcome everyone, it's Tennis20 back again. In this video, we'll be discussing about if statements, which are decision structures, an essential part of every program, and we'll be studying this in Visual Basic. Before we start into if statements, we must understand what is control flow. Control flow is the order in which program instructions or statements are executed or evaluated. In general, a program starts from the beginning and then executes instructions sequentially until it reaches the end. Control flow can also be determined by the structure of the program. Control flow also lets you skip certain lines of code depending on the conditions or loops that are used in the program. So, what are if statements? An if statement is a type of control flow statement, also known as a decision structure, that is used to control the execution of a program depending on the result of a certain condition. If the condition evaluates to true, then the program will execute a certain block of code. If the condition is false, then the program will skip the code and proceed to the next instruction. In this way, if statements allow you to create branches of code and make decisions based on certain conditions. If statements are closely related to block level statements. Block level statement is a group of statements that is treated by the compiler as if it were a single statement. A block is a set of statements enclosed within initiating and terminating declaration statements. It can apply to loops, decision structures, and other structures. Hence, if you declare a variable within a block, you can use it only within that scope. To create a if statement, we'll write the if keyword followed by a condition. Make sure that the condition evaluates to true or false. Then only the if condition will work. Then we have the then keyword followed by the statement you want to execute, which in our case will be outputting to the console. This kind of syntax is known as single line syntax, which is the most efficient if you're writing for a single command to be output when a condition evaluates to true. If we run this, we can see that we got the output. Now, to convert this to a multi-line syntax, all we have to do is to move the statement which is inside the if condition to the next line. And then we have the terminating block, which is the end if. Essentially, you have now a block level statement, which the compiler thinks of as a single statement, but as essentially works as a block. So what matters the most here is the scope. So if I'm going to declare a variable c and give it the value of 10, I can access it over here. But if I am going to try to access the variable outside of the if statement, I'm going to get an error because the variable c is defined in the if condition and it cannot be used outside of the if block. Hence, this is known as a block scope, and that the variable c is limited to the block scope of the if statement. If we try to access the value of c, we can see that we get the result of 10. We can further change statements, and we can say if a is lesser than b, which is true. We are still getting the output of c because the condition has evaluated to true. Now, this was just a half of the if statement. What if your condition evaluated to false and you wanted to run that block of code? To do that, you simply introduce another keyword, which is the else keyword, and give in it the statement as well. We'll copy this above as well. And now we can essentially see here that we have two scopes rather than one scope. How? In this way. If we have a variable c declared over here, and we try to access it in the else part, we can see that we're getting an error again. So when you're writing if conditions, you have to remember that the if part or the starting part has a separate scope for the variables, and the else part has a separate scope. because this block of code will only work if your statement or the condition over here will evaluate to true. If it evaluates to false, the else will be run. So if we'll try to have this, if b is not equals to a, which is true because b is 15 and a is 10, we'll get the output of yes. Now, if we'll try to make them equal, which is definitely not true, we'll see that we'll get the else condition statement. This is known as a if-else statement or a complete if condition statement. Now, you can also chain if statements. Instead of using the else, we can use the else if keyword followed by another condition in which we can say if b is greater than a. Again, this statement or this block only runs if the initial condition has been false. In this case, b is not equals to a, so this block of code will be skipped. It will go to this line and it will then check for another condition if b is greater than a, and it will execute that. So if we now run, the output will be yes, it's greater. So essentially this whole code was skipped and we had come to this part. Now it does not only limit you to a single else if, you can chain as many else if you want. Lastly, we'll discuss nested if statements, which are very important if you are wanting to check about the conditions stepwise. We could use else if statements or we could use nested if statements. So if we can check if b is not equals to a, which is true, we can have another if statement inside of it, which checks if b is greater than a, which will be yes, it will be greater. And we can also place another line here to show that this line will also be executed along with this. In this case, we consider the if statement also as a code, of course. So if this condition evaluates to true, all the code inside of this will be also run. But before that, it will also check this condition. And it will also give us this output if the condition evaluates to true. So you can see that we had the output from both of the scopes. Again, scope matters a lot over here. If I have a variable c over here as 10, I cannot access c over here outside the if statement, but I can access it inside of this if statement because this if statement is placed inside of this if statement. So you can see we're able to access the variable c. Similarly, if you bring the declaration of c within this innermost if statement and we try to access the variable c outside of this if statement, we'll get another error because this c variable is limited to this block statement of if condition, and we're trying to access it towards the outside. Essentially, variables can be only accessed from the inside if they're declared outside, but they cannot be accessed if they are declared inside of this statement and you're trying to access it towards the outside.